When you think of Genghis Khan, you probably think of conquest, of armies sweeping across continents. But history remembers the warrior, and it tends to forget the banker. We're going to open the books on his real empire, an empire built less on the sword and more on a genius-level grasp of finance.
Sure, he's famous for the cities he burned, we all know that story. But what if his real empire, the one that truly changed the world, was built on something he controlled even more fiercely, the flow of money itself?
So, let's break this down. The myth, it's all about an empire of the sword, right? One built on fear and pure brute force. But the reality, well, the reality was an empire of the caravan. It was a massive economic machine, built on trade and, crucially, on security. You see, Genghis Khan is something fundamental. An army can take a city, sure, but only trade can make it yours, forever. To really get just how revolutionary this was, you have to picture the world before him. It was a completely fractured place, a world where the idea of global trade was, frankly, a joke.
You know, the Silk Road sounds so romantic, doesn't it? But before the Mongols, it was a total mess. It wasn't one road, it was a tangle of dangerous paths. For any merchant, it was a nightmare. You had bandits waiting around every corner, local warlords hitting you with endless tolls, and constant wars popping up out of nowhere. Honestly, it was a system designed to fail. Trying to move goods from one end to the other was basically a death wish.
And then he arrived. For all the violence of the Mongol conquests, they did something nobody else had ever done. They pulled this shattered world together under one roof, one single authority. Historians have a name for this, the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. And for about 100 years, the sheer force of the Mongol Empire created this incredible period of stability. I mean, think about it from a merchant's perspective. Suddenly, you could travel from Europe all the way to China and not have to bribe your way through 10 different warring kingdoms. This was a complete game changer. There was this saying at the time that a young woman could walk from one end of the empire to the other carrying a sack of gold and no one would dare touch her. And look, this wasn't because everyone suddenly became nice. It was because the punishment for even thinking about it was so swift, so final that it just wasn't worth the risk. Fear became the ultimate market guarantee. So here's the Mongol offer, and it was an offer you just couldn't refuse. Genghis Khan figured out what merchants really want, more than anything else. It's not low taxes, it's not even easy roads. It's predictability. It's knowing your goods will actually get there. He was basically selling ultimate market stability, and his army was the guarantee. But okay, this wasn't just about having soldiers on every road. That's the simple version. The Mongols were also incredible financial engineers. They built these amazingly sophisticated systems designed to do one thing, make everything flow faster. The crown jewel of their system was something called the yam, and the best way to think about it is like a 13th century version of FedEx mixed with the internet. It was this incredible network of relay stations set up every 20 or 30 miles. You could get fresh horses, food, a place to sleep, and it meant that information, goods, and messengers could just fly across the continent at speeds that were just unheard of. It was logistics, yes, but it was also a powerful tool for control. And this is where you see the big strategic shift in their thinking. Look, anyone can plunder a city, but that's a one-time payout, right? You burn the city, you take the gold, and that's it. You've destroyed your source of wealth. But controlling trade, that's an endless river of revenue. It's predictable, it's taxable, and it can fund an empire forever. This is the moment the conqueror starts thinking like a CEO. And they didn't stop there. They rolled out a whole suite of financial innovations that were way ahead of their time. They expanded the use of paper money, which basically created a single currency for this massive economic zone. They standardized all the weights and measures, so you knew you weren't getting ripped off. And maybe the biggest thing, they got rid of all those random, annoying local tolls and replaced them with one single predictable tax. It just oiled the entire machine. But here's the thing about creating a perfectly efficient, interconnected global system. It comes with a hidden cost, a fatal flaw. The very thing that made the Mongol Empire so incredibly wealthy was also its greatest weakness. Because the Silk Road was a conduit for everything. It didn't care if it was carrying silk and spices or something far, far deadlier. The empire's greatest achievement, its connectivity, was about to unleash its worst nightmare. So in the 1340s, the Black Death appears, and it doesn't spread slowly through some forgotten villages. No, it travels first class, on the very trade routes the Mongols had made so safe and so efficient. The caravans that were the lifeblood of the empire suddenly became vectors of death.
In the most tragic irony imaginable, the Mongol peace created the perfect superhighway for the plague.
The result was absolute collapse. Trade didn't just slow down, it stopped. Dead. People died. Markets emptied out. All that security the Mongols had built their empire on, it meant nothing when there was no one left to trade. The entire economic engine just seized up and died.
But believe it or not, the story doesn't end with the collapse of their empire. Because the idea, the blueprint for a globalized world that they created, that survived, and it would go on to shape the world we're all living in right now.
Think about this for a second. When the Mongol Empire fell apart, the land routes to Asia became dangerous and chaotic all over again. So what did the Europeans do? They didn't just shrug and give up. They took to the seas. Guys like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, they weren't just curious explorers. They were businessmen, desperately looking for a new way to get back to the incredible global market the Mongols had shown them was possible.
And when you look closely, the rules of the game haven't really changed that much at all. The Silk Road, today we call it global supply chains. The Mongol horsemen providing security, now it's naval patrols and military alliances. And those choke points like mountain passes, now they're the Suez Canal or the Strait of Malacca. And the biggest parallel of all, that's systemic risk. The Black Death that shut down the caravans, well, we've seen how a modern pandemic or a financial crisis can do the exact same thing to our system.
Really, today's supply chains are just digital Silk Roads. It's the same basic system, built on the exact same principles of flow, security, and fragility. We've just swapped out the camels for container ships.
So what's the big takeaway here? When we close the Conqueror's ledger, what's the timeless lesson for us? Well, for one, it's that real lasting power isn't about how much land you can conquer. It's about controlling the flow of trade. It also teaches us that the connections that make us rich also make us incredibly fragile. And maybe most importantly, it shows that the ultimate currency in any economic system is trust. Trust that the system works. Once that's gone, everything else follows. And that leaves us with one final, pretty uncomfortable question. The Mongols' financial empire proved that even the strongest, most secure global system can shatter when its connections break. So we have to ask ourselves, if the global trade routes we depend on every single day suddenly snap, do we still stand?